Every hospital has its secrets. Long corridors where the lights flicker just a little too long. Empty rooms where whispers echo from no visible source. And shadows that move when no one's watching. But the real darkness comes alive at night, when the halls grow quiet, and those who work the late shifts see things they can never unsee. Tonight, you'll hear the chilling, true stories from nurses, doctors, and chaplains who witnessed the unexplainable. These are the darkest secrets of hospital night shifts. Secrets that defy logic and linger in the mind long after dawn breaks. The oncology ward of St. Vincent's Hospital was always quiet after midnight. The kind of quiet that pressed against your eardrums, broken only by the occasional beep of a monitor or the distant shuffle of soft-soled shoes on linoleum. Nurse Laura Mitchell had worked the night shift here for 6 years, long enough to know every creak in the floorboards, every flicker of the fluorescent lights, but nothing could have prepared her for what she saw on that cold October night. It began like any other shift. Laura moved methodically from room to room, checking IV drips, adjusting oxygen levels, murmuring reassurances to half-sleeping patients. The clock read 2:17 a.m. when she reached room 312, a room that had been empty for days, its door slightly ajar. She was about to pass by when a movement caught her eye. There, perched on the edge of the bed, sat an elderly man. His hospital gown hung loosely from bony shoulders, the fabric too thin for the chill that seeped through the ward's walls. His bare feet dangled just above the floor, toes curled as if avoiding contact with the ground. Laura froze. No patient was assigned to this room. No one should have been there at all. "Sir?" she called softly, her voice barely louder than the hum of the overhead lights. The man didn't turn, didn't blink. He simply stared at the far wall, his gaze fixed on something she couldn't see. The air grew heavier, the temperature dropping so suddenly, her breath fogged in front of her. "Are you lost? Do you need help?" She tried again, stepping closer. That's when she felt it. A presence, thick and suffocating, like the weight of eyes boring into her skin. The man's head tilted slightly, as if hearing a voice only he could discern. And then, between one heartbeat and the next, he was gone. Not like a person standing up and walking away. Gone as if he had never been there at all. The bed was empty, the sheets undisturbed. Laura's pulse roared in her ears as she backed into the hallway, her skin prickling with the undeniable certainty that she wasn't alone. The next morning, she reported what she'd seen to the charge nurse, who paled as she pulled up the room's records. "That's impossible," the nurse whispered. Room 312 hadn't been used in over a week. Not since the last patient was transferred to hospice. But when they dug deeper, they found something worse. 7 years earlier, a man named Walter Hargrove had died in that very bed. A terminal cancer patient, alone except for the staff, who'd held his hand as he took his final breath. The description matched perfectly. The thin frame, the hollow cheeks, even the way he sat, as if waiting for someone who never came. The other nurses traded glances. They'd all heard the stories, Whispers of a figure seen pacing the halls, of bedsheets tugged loose in vacant rooms, of the cold spot near 312 that no heater could warm. But Laura had seen him, and now as she walked those same halls night after night, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Sometimes, out of the corner of her eye, she'd catch a flicker of movement near room 312. Sometimes, in the deadest hours before dawn, she'd hear it, a faint, rasping breath just behind her. To this day, no one knows why Walter remains. Some say he's searching for the family who never visited. Others believe he's trapped, reliving his final moments in an endless loop. But the staff of St. Vincent's know the truth. The dead don't always leave. And in the silence of the night shift, when the lights flicker and the shadows stretch too long, you might just meet the patient who wasn't there. This was only the beginning, because what Laura didn't know, what none of them knew, was that room 312 wasn't the only place where the veil between this world and the next had worn thin. The hospital held darker secrets. Secrets that would soon reveal themselves in ways no one could have imagined. But that's a story for another night. For now, sleep tight, if you can. And remember, next time you're in a hospital after dark, don't look too closely at the empty beds. You might not like what looks back. The ICU at Mercy General Hospital never truly sleeps. Machines hum, ventilators hiss, and the occasional groan of pain reminds you this is where life clings by its fingernails. But nothing prepares you for the shriek of a code blue alarm at 3:17 a.m. That sound, piercing, relentless, slices through the night like a scalpel. Dr. Daniel Reynolds had responded to hundreds of codes in his career, but this one would haunt him long after the patient was gone. It started like any other cardiac arrest. The team exploded into action, crash cartwheels squeaking, nurses shouting vitals, the rhythmic thump of compressions. Patient was a John Doe, mid-50s, found unresponsive in a parking garage. No ID, no history, just a fading pulse and pupils fixed wide open. They worked him for 27 minutes. Epinephrine, defibrillation, pleading with whatever gods listen in places like this. But the flat line on the monitor stretched on. Endless and absolute. Dr. Reynolds called time of death at 3:44 a.m. A nurse began disconnecting tubes, while another drew the sheet up over the man's face. That's when the monitor screamed. Not the erratic spikes of a fibrillating heart. A perfect, steady rhythm. 72 beats per minute. The corpse lay motionless beneath the sheet. Yet the machine insisted. This heart is beating. Silence crashed over the room. The respiratory therapist crossed herself. A nurse muttered, "That's not possible," as she checked the leads, still properly attached to cold, lifeless skin. Reynolds grabbed the monitor's power cord and yanked it from the wall. The screen went black. For 3 seconds, there was only the sound of 12 people holding their breath. Then, beep, beep, beep. The rhythm continued, now coming from the backup battery they all knew hadn't been installed. They moved the body to the morgue. The monitor followed, screeching its impossible cadence down hallways until they locked it in a supply closet. At 5:03 a.m., maintenance found it silent, dark, its battery compartment empty. The staff tried to write it off as a glitch, until the next month, when a night nurse passing room 7 heard it again. Code blue, room 7. But the room was empty, the monitor unplugged. Security footage showed the alarm button depressing itself at 3:44 a.m. exactly. Now, years later, Dr. Reynolds still jerks awake at that hour, sheets damp with sweat, his ears ringing with a sound that doesn't exist. The hospital retired room 7 as a storage closet, but cleaners refuse to enter after dark. Some say if you press your ear to the door at 3:44, you'll hear it. Not the flat line of death, but the strong, steady pulse of something that refuses to stay dead. This wasn't the first unnatural incident at Mercy General. It wouldn't be the last, because deep in the hospital's basement, in the oldest wing, where the walls sweat and the lights buzz like angry flies, something else is waking up. Something that remembers when this building wasn't a place of healing, but of something far darker. But that's another story. One that begins with a little girl who knew too much, and the tall man who followed her from room 214. The pediatric ward of St. Mary's Hospital was supposed to be the cheerful unit. Walls painted with cartoon animals, a playroom stocked with toys, the constant murmur of children's laughter. Nurse Sarah Williamson had chosen this specialty precisely because it was full of life, full of hope. That all changed on the third Tuesday of November, during what should have been a routine night shift. The ward was unusually quiet that evening, with only 4 patients occupying its 12 beds. Sarah made her rounds mechanically until she reached room 214, where the door stood slightly ajar, despite the chart showing it as unoccupied. A chill ran down her spine as she pushed the door open. There, in the center bed, sat a little girl, no older than 6. Her hospital gown hung loose on her tiny frame, the pale blue fabric nearly blending with her ashen skin. The child's dark eyes locked onto Sarah with an intensity that felt decades too old for her face. "He's back," the girl whispered, her voice cracking like dry leaves underfoot. Before Sarah could respond, the child's small finger pointed to the far corner of the room. "The tall man doesn't want me to sleep." Sarah turned to look, her nursing instincts warring with the primal fear crawling up her throat. The corner was empty, just shadows stretching from the dim nightlight. When she turned back, the girl was describing him in terrifying detail. "He wears a black coat that moves when there's no wind. His face is like smoke, but I can see his teeth when he smiles." The monitors in the room began beeping erratically, though the child showed no physical distress. Sarah reached for the call button, but the girl grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. "Don't let him know you can hear me," she breathed, her fingernails digging crescents into Sarah's skin. At 6:15 a.m., after the most harrowing night of her career, Sarah returned to room 214 with a social worker, only to find the bed neatly made, the monitors powered down. The front desk insisted the girl had been discharged at 5:30 a.m., though no paperwork could be found. The administration later confirmed no child matching that description had been admitted that week. Security footage showed Sarah entering and exiting an empty room multiple times throughout the night, sometimes appearing to converse with thin air. The official report called it a stress-induced hallucination. But Sarah knew what she saw. She began researching the hospital's history and uncovered a disturbing pattern. Every 7 years since 1972, a staff member reported encountering a pale child in room 214, always describing the same tall man, always vanishing by morning. The most chilling discovery came from microfiche newspapers. In 1972, a 6-year-old leukemia patient named Emily Carter had died in that room after repeatedly screaming about a smoke-faced man no one else could see. Sarah quit pediatric nursing the following month, but sometimes when she drives past St. Mary's at night, she swears she sees a small face pressed against the third-floor window of room 214, and standing just behind it, barely visible in the reflection, the outline of something impossibly tall. This wasn't the first time the tall man had been seen in the hospital. The security team knew him too well, though they never spoke of it openly, because 2 floors below the pediatric ward, in the abandoned psychiatric wing where the lights haven't worked in decades, something waits in the darkness. Something that's been collecting children's whispers for a very long time. But that story begins with a single empty gurney rolling through the morgue at midnight. The basements of Mercy General Hospital held secrets colder than the stainless steel drawers of its morgue. Security guard Frank Kowalski had worked the midnight shift for 12 years, long enough to know every flickering light and unexplained echo in the building. But nothing prepared him for what the cameras captured on the night of November 17th. It began at 2:03 a.m. when the motion sensor triggered near the morgue entrance, despite the hallway being visibly empty. The heavy metal door swung inward with a groan that echoed through the security feed, revealing only darkness beyond. Frank's coffee turned to ice in his stomach as he watched the footage. One by one, the body drawers slid open with mechanical precision. First number 12, then 8, then 15, as if someone were searching for something specific. The temperature sensors registered a 20-degree drop in the room during this time, though the cooling system hadn't activated. When drawer 7 opened, Frank swore he saw frost forming around the edges before the camera glitched for exactly 13 seconds. That's when he grabbed his flashlight and descended to the basement, his breath coming in ragged clouds, despite the hospital's climate control. The morgue was silent when he arrived, the drawers all securely closed. But the air smelled wrong, not like antiseptic and death, but like ozone and wet earth. His flashlight beam caught something glistening on examination table 3. As he approached, his radio erupted with static, nearly making him drop the light. There, etched into a thin layer of frost that shouldn't have existed in the climate-controlled room, was a name: Eleanor Grayson. The letters looked like they'd been traced by skeletal fingers, the G curling unnaturally like a noose. Administration initially dismissed Frank's report until they checked the day's records. Eleanor Grayson, a 78-year-old stroke victim, had been processed into that very morgue at 9:15 that morning. Her body had been stored in drawer 7, the one that had frosted over on camera. When they pulled her records, they discovered something even more disturbing. Eleanor had worked as a night shift nurse in this same hospital from 1968 to 2001. Her personnel file contained 3 disciplinary notices for inappropriate nighttime conduct, including one incident where she was found rearranging patients who were not under her care. The security footage from that November night was copied exactly 13 times before inexplicably corrupting. The original now resides in a locked cabinet in the hospital administrator's office, though current staff claim the drawer is always ice cold to the touch. New security guards report hearing drawers sliding open when the morgue is empty, always between 2 o'clock and 2:15 a.m. Some claim to have seen footprints in the frost that appears on the floor, barefoot, small, like an elderly woman's, leading from drawer 7 to the old staff lockers. But the most disturbing detail was discovered during renovations last year. Behind the morgue's back wall, workers found a hidden compartment containing Nurse Grayson's old uniform, neatly folded, smelling of formaldehyde, with a name tag that read, E. Grayson, Night Supervisor. Under it lay a list of patient names, written in shaky handwriting, all dated from the 1970s. Every name matched an unexplained death during night shifts. Every death occurred in rooms that would later become known for paranormal activity. This wasn't the first time the dead walked Mercy General's halls. It wouldn't be the last, because high above the morgue, in the maternity ward where the newest lives begin, something has started appearing in the nursery cameras at night. A figure in an old-fashioned nurse's uniform, peering into bassinets as if checking charts. But the infants see her too. They always do. That's why the night nurses have learned to dread the sound of tiny fists pounding against glass at 2:15 a.m. when the monitors all briefly switch to static and the scent of wet earth fills the room. After 42 years of walking hospital corridors, thick with the scent of antiseptic and human suffering, Chaplain Elias Hayes believed nothing could shake him. He had comforted murderers taking their last rattling breaths, held the hands of children slipping away from leukemia, and recited last rites in rooms where the air itself seemed to pulse with unfinished business. But on his final night before retirement, as the clock in St. Peter Luke's Hospital Chapel struck 11:47 p.m., he would learn that the dead have one last lesson to teach the living. Some doors, once opened, can never be fully closed. The call came from the fourth-floor oncology unit. A Mr. Daniel Reeves, stage 4 pancreatic cancer, had taken a sudden turn. The night nurse's voice cracked as she described how the dying man had begun screaming about the people in the walls. When Hayes entered room 417, the stench of rotting flowers hit him like a physical blow. Reeves lay drenched in sweat that smelled faintly of copper, his yellowed fingers clawing at the crucifix around his neck. The monitors showed a heart rate of 140, but the man's sunken eyes held the glassy sheen of someone already halfway gone. Hayes began the standard prayers, but Reeves's hand shot out with surprising strength, his fingernails drawing blood as they dug into the chaplain's wrist. "They're waiting for me," he whispered, his breath smelling of spoiled meat. When Hayes asked who, the dying man's pupils dilated so wide his irises nearly disappeared. His head lolled toward the empty corner behind Hayes's shoulder. All of them. The heart monitor flatlined at that exact moment. But what happened next would haunt Hayes's dreams for the rest of his life. The temperature dropped so suddenly, Hayes saw his own breath crystallize in the air. The crucifix above the bed swung violently, as if caught in a gale, though the air remained perfectly still. From the hallway came the distinct sound of dozens of shuffling feet. Impossible, given the empty night shift corridors. Hayes spun toward the door, just as every electrical device in the room shorted out with a pop, plunging them into darkness, save for the eerie glow of the exit sign. When emergency power restored the lights 30 seconds later, Reeves's corpse had twisted into a fetal position, his arms wrapped around himself like a child, bracing for impact. Security footage from that night showed Hayes alone in the room with the body. But at the 11:47 p.m. timestamp, the camera glitched for precisely 13 seconds. During that gap, the thermal imaging system registered 37 distinct cold spots materializing around the bed before converging on Reeves's body in a wave. The most disturbing detail emerged when techs enhanced the final frames. What appeared to be handprints forming in the condensation on the walls, dozens of them, all different sizes, pressing inward from some unseen other side. The hospital administrator personally deleted the footage the next morning, citing equipment malfunction. Hayes's official retirement photo shows a man aged a decade in a single night, his once steady hands now trembling around the edges of the frame. He never spoke of what truly happened, not even when the night nurses began reporting strange occurrences in room 417. The scent of rotting flowers that came and went, the sound of whispered names coming from empty beds, the way the crucifix above the door would sometimes spin slowly on its nail at exactly 11:47 p.m. But the final horror emerged 6 months later during renovations. When workers pulled up the floorboards in room 417, they found 13 rusted medical tags from the 1940s, each bearing the name of a patient who had died in that very room. The tags were arranged in a perfect circle around a single item: Chaplain Hayes's stolen retirement watch, its hands frozen at 11:47, its glass face cracked like a spiderweb from some tremendous impact. The hospital sealed the room permanently, but night shift workers claim the scratching sounds from behind that locked door have only grown louder, more insistent. This was never just one man's story. It was never just one room, because deep in the hospital archives, buried in a box marked 1953 incident reports, lies a single yellowed page describing a mass casualty event that occurred when an entire ward of patients simultaneously screamed about the people in the walls before expiring at exactly 11:47 p.m. The report concludes with a line that chills the blood. The walls themselves were warm to the touch for 3 days afterward and emitted a sound witnesses described as distant knocking. Perhaps Chaplain Hayes knew the terrible truth that hospitals are not just places where the dead linger, but where something far older and hungrier comes to collect. And as you watch this video in the dark, with only your screen illuminating the walls around you, listen very carefully. That faint tapping you hear, it's not the radiator, it's not the pipes, it's the sound of something learning the shape of your name. But that's a story for another night. Sleep well, if you can. And remember, when the clock nears midnight and you feel that inexplicable chill, don't turn around, because tonight, they're not waiting for Daniel Reeves. They're waiting for you. These stories are just the beginning. Hospitals are built on lifetimes of joy and grief, hope and despair. And sometimes, what should stay buried doesn't. If you've ever walked an empty hallway and felt a chill, or heard a voice where none should be, you're not alone. The night shift knows the truth. And now, so do you. But here's the thing. This hospital has one last secret, and it's hiding in the comments section. Type "I believe" if you've ever felt something unseen watching you in the dark, or "not alone" if you've heard whispers when no one was there. The more likes this video gets, the faster we'll expose what really happened in the hospital's abandoned 13th floor, where the walls still bleed at midnight. Don't scroll yet. That shadow behind you? It's just your screen, unless you're watching this after 3 a.m. Smash that subscribe button before something else does it for you. Because next week, we're revealing the unedited morgue footage that made an entire security team quit. Turn on notifications, unless you're afraid of what might wake you up when we post.